Hello people, how y'all doing? My day today consisted of changing the passenger side lower control arm on this '04 New Edge Mustang. Nose totally shot. That's my Hearthstone. It's my half-inch drive, American metric, deep, shallow sockets. I got two other sets of SKs. This is an SK box, and I got two other sets of SKs just like it that are half-inch drive. There's my 3/8 drive, and I got another whole set like that dang in the boxes. I bought these boxes, as whole boxes, because you can never have enough sockets and ratchets that are good American made. I got also a 1/4 inch, and I got wrenches up the ass. Two sets of both American and metric. Here's the jack I used. I didn't decide I was going to take pictures at first. I just went over and started doing it. And by the time I got the tire off, I decided that the way I'm doing it's a little unconventional. It's not like most people do and pull the spindle off the strut and pull the rack out and the tie rod ends off and all that I've seen on YouTube. I pulled the control arms. That's how I did. Here's how I did it. Right here is what I'm doing. You notice the tire's off the car. And what I'm doing is I got my jack placed clear over here on the outside of the control arm, trying to get as much leverage as I can to collapse this spring as much as I can. There's my tire underneath. There's a wire that I use. When you pull your wire off the spool, it's all spread apart and stuff, and then you fold it over to where you both get the same ends down here, and then you hold the wire in your hands and you pull it through, and it brings it together like that, nice and clean. There's a couple of tools I used. I didn't use that, and I didn't use that channel lock up there. There's the new control arm. You got to have a good pair of pliers when you're tying wire. Remember that, folks. And so now I've got this tied together with 16 strands of wire. I have it wires doubled up, and you go in, out, back down, back in, back up, back down, and then you snap each wire tight individually. I missed one, you can see right there, it didn't pull tight, but thankfully the other 7 strands held. But you pull each strand tight and make a good tie right there so that you can take the pieces off. You loosen up the torsion bar here. You see I've sprayed it. And you take it off the bottom. You take it clear off the bottom. See, I've loosened it up a little bit. You can see now I got the spring. I've broke the, right here, I should have got a better picture. It was bright out and I couldn't see what I was doing. I was trying to get a picture of the spindle, where the spindle's into the lower control arm right there. See, I've got it broke free right here. What you do is you loosen up this nut on top and you just start smacking that spindle right there till it eventually pops free. It will pop free. You might have to beat on that a little bit, but it will pop free. And then that's where I see I broke that free, and then that's when I put the wire back. I jacked it back up after I broke the spindle free of the ball joint out of the lower control arm, and then I jacked it back up and I put the wire on tight. I've pulled the lower bolt off the torsion bar, and you can see how terrible worn out that bushing right there in the control arm is. And I've pulled the nuts off, and I've dropped it it down. I did not, people, do not, this is not, I put the jack underneath of this. Right here, the jack was underneath of that lower control arm, held up against that spring when I released the lower control arm, so that the spring did not shock any of them wires. You have to let the control arm down with the jack so that them wires seat properly. Look how collapsed that spring is. I should have took a picture of one knot and see is what here. This is how I suspended this spindle with the brake assembly and the strut all held together. I collapsed the strut as tight as I could up into the body of the Mustang, and down here there's a hole that you poke them two wires through as you are collapsing that strut. And then when you have that strut completely collapsed, you wrap around that strut bolt right there 3 times with your wire, and it will hold your strut, your spindle, and everything up out of your way. And then I'm just taking pictures of how I've got that. You can see how tight them wires are. There's 8 there, 8 there, 8 there, 8 there. Anyway, yeah, so, and what you want to do, this is where the K member attaches to the body. You want to pull that bolt completely out of the way so that you can pull this lower control arm bolt out without having to fiddle around with getting it past that K-frame bolt. At this point, you want to loosen up your entire rack on both sides so that you can pry it out on this side. The driver's side is a little bit rougher to pry out. On the driver's side, I took the isolators completely out of the rack so that I had more room. Now I've got the control arm out, and I'm starting to install the new one. I'm pushing the bolt in. You line the holes up. I push that bolt in by hand. You may or may not have to use a little persuasive tool known as the beater and beat this out, that in, and that out just a little bit to give yourself every little bit of wiggle room that you have. And once you tighten them out, that back down, they go right back to where they were. And then right there, you see how that's not lined up. I have the bolt started in the other side. I grab my little bullpen and I pry that to where it's in line, and I push that through with my finger. Now, I'm going to say one thing that I didn't do that I wish I would have done after I thought about it. These bolts stick past the top of the nut a whole nother nut. You could cut 3/4 of an inch off that bolt and eliminate half the problem of taking that bolt out of the driver's side in the front, because on the driver's side the rack is held in by the steering column, and it's a bitch. It is. So now to get this off, I'm putting it back on now, but you get your 8mm wrench and your 18mm wrench, and you can work it all from this front side, which I prefer to do, or you can get your 17 or 15, I can't quite remember what's on the back side, but I have done it that way too when I was stretching on tools. But this is my preferred method, is to grab the 8 and the 18 and just do it all from the front. And I'm putting it back on now because I've already pulled it out, put the new lower control arm in. Now I'm working solo, and right there is where I leave enough of this boot hanging over so that it doesn't dig a hole in my lower control arm from the edge of the boot. And I put the jack underneath the spring directly on the spring tower right there. I got my jack right under there. To get it under there, I just put my beater underneath the end of the A-frame, so I'm working solo. And now I've got it set up and I'm coming up with it. And at this point here, I'm on my side with one hand on the torsion bar tower bolt and my foot on my jack, my floor jack, so that I can push the lower A-frame up. Having an extra hand at this time would have been real handy, but I'm flying solo, and I push it up, and I'm continuing here on my side, and I'm pushing it up through the spindle. I've already, of course, cut the wire and dropped the strut down as far as it'll go, and I'm coming up into the spindle now, and I've already got it all put back together at the spindle, and I'm torquing it down on this side. The other side's a little different torque method, but this is a 15/16 wrench, and I call yield as hard as I can push on that with my hand, because it's a good 13-14 inch wrench. And then I push it another quarter with my foot, and I consider that yield in a quarter of a turn, and that's plenty tight. And now I'm tight with my control arm into the spindle and attached still to the strut assembly, and the brakes have not been pulled off. I have now cut the wire, and I'll pull the wire out of the way. And now this here is how I do the towers. I get a 15 millimeter deep socket and a 10 millimeter wrench, and I hold the tower and I just loosen it up. But now at this point I'm putting it back together. That's just how I do it, so I'm not nigger rigging. Okay, here I don't know what I'm showing, but here I've torqued these down now. I've brought these down. I don't go beyond yield with them. I just pull them as tight as I can with a regular 1/2 inch drive ratchet, and just hold the roll and just tighten them as tight as you can. That bushing in there has a solid sleeve in there, and you ain't gonna tighten them no more than tight. So good and tight is tight with them. That's the array of tools I use. My beater. Make sure when you're doing your springs you have this nice set of clines. I had this 15 inch and my 10 inch 1/2 inch drive. You don't need this. You can get by with leverage that you use. I sprayed everything with PBs. There's my spool of wire. It's all put back together. There's the one I did today. There's both of them. I did the driver's side yesterday. And there they are in the garbage. And here's the driver's side, see? You can't push on the driver's side using this spindle attached to the strut that I did. So what you do is you pull that 15/16. I don't know what the metric is. I think it's 22 or something metric. I have that, but they didn't have one. I prefer to use the appropriate wrenches for the nuts and the bolts. But where I stopped to get the nut AutoZone, good for AutoZone, they didn't have the appropriate 22 that I needed, so I got the 15/16. And I pulled that as tight as I could with the regular wrench on it. And I'm pretty good at tightening bolts. I can just about put a wrench on anything anyone else tightens and give it a little more. And so I pull that as tight as I can on that control arm to ball joint with the wrench. And then I add this extra 9 inches of wrench, and I give her a good solid quarter turn. And I call that yield plus quarter. I had to use them tools there to take the wheels off. I account for all my tools when I'm done. That's why I prefer to keep them in my boxes, because it's easy, it's done. That went. It was about 2 hours and 10 minutes from start to finish. I think I could have done it in an hour and a half on this side if I didn't decide to show you guys how I did it. And yeah, it's pretty smooth, pretty easy.
Oh, he's
This
kind
is,
of a dirty little fella.
I got a BBK cold air intake for this.
Clean it
Got
up a little
MSG
bit.
ignition, 8mm red wires,
Dirt, dirt, dirt,
spark plugs,
dirt, dirt,
fuel
dirt.
filter.
See what it looks like when we're done.
That was just a bonus. I didn't realize it uploaded that. Well, anyway, so yeah, guys, that's how I did my control arms. And right when I got back, I caught just a tail end of Flatzoids, and I had this on my computer before I left this morning to go over to my son's house to actually do my control arm bushings. And when I came back and I got off Flatzoid's live stream, I was over here goofing around with this, and I'm looking at how I'm at 0 right there, and I know that this is a straight edge on top and bottom, and right here is about as far as I can see that's got that line, and this is Getty Images. Art Wager took the picture. This is of the Causeway there in Louisiana. And notice what's going to happen here. Look at that. Look at that. Perfectly straight. That's 23 miles worth of level water that you're looking at there. And now, look at this. The other side of the straight edge. Notice it's not lined up right there because of perception, how things get smaller. You've seen I did not change it. It's 16 degrees still. 16 degrees. Straight edge. Straight road. Level plane we live upon. And right here, 16 degrees, it don't touch on this end, but with a couple rotations, bumped it up a little bit when I was rotating. Booty bang, booty bong. 1 degree. Now, if you really had where you could do 17.1 degree and 16.8 or whatever, you could really bring this in. You could dissect this Causeway picture. It's in Getty Images. Art Wager took the picture. And I'm willing to wager any one of you of all believers. Earth is a level playing field, and you live on it. And you're just here to live out your mortal experience. Be well, folks, and have a good day. Hope you learned something.